Alright guys, gals, and all great ones that are out there that I can't see. Welcome to the first video of my lore series. And this is going to be me delving deeper into the things I found out about the game in my other playthrough. So if you go on my YouTube page and you look at my Bloodborne playthrough, I kind of talk about the lore while I play the game. And well, I actually was post commentary most of it, but I didn't know anything about the game as I was playing. Everything I was saying in those videos was what I was thinking of right after I played the game. So there wasn't much like correctness. It was more about the way I was thinking and about what I was thinking was going on. But after playing the whole game and coming to a conclusion, then figuring out some other things, having the guidebook next to me, those kind of things, it helped me kind of put something together where I think I kind of know what's going on. Now, what I say doesn't necessarily mean I'm right. It is mostly speculation, and it's speculation not because I'm just making this stuff up. It's speculation because the items have a very, very vague description, right? It says something, it gives you some facts, but then it leaves a lot up to you to explain what's going on. And because of that, everybody has different things. And in fact, when I was making this, I came up with like five, six scenarios that all made sense. So the one I'm going to be talking about though in these is something that I think to me makes the most sense. It seems to be what I would believe would be the best way to explain what the game is trying to do, and it also doesn't go like too far out there, but it's also not incredibly boring either, which I think is kind of a great way to give out a game. You know, you don't want to be too far out there where you're just like, okay, that's crazy, but at the same time you don't want to be so boring where it's like, oh, I don't know, that just seems too easy, right? So trying to find that great median between there is what I was trying to do and trying to come up with. There are some stuff that is just out of this world in this game, literally, and you know, and then that comes from like the HP Lovecraft part of the game. But with all that being said, my name is Chris, and this is my lore of what I think Bloodborne is about. So today we're going to jump right in, and we're going to talk about the beginning of everything. And what I mean by that is I'm not talking about the Thumerians, because there's not a ton of information about them. I'm really talking about Byrgenwerth, the Healing Church, Laurence and Willem. Those are the kind of the things that are going to be the hot topics, I guess you can say, in this video. But to really understand that whole scenario, we're going to have to talk about blood. Now, talking about blood would be gross most of the time, but not when we're talking about it in Bloodborne. It's something that they really throughout the whole game want you to understand. Everything is revolved around this aspect of blood. Not all of it's necessarily good. In fact, a lot of things in this game aren't good. A lot of things are sad. They're wrong. They're twisted. They're messed up. And this game, I think, really wants you to understand that part of like humanity and the human existence. They want you to really understand how twisted and how weirded we can be depending on the goals that we want to achieve. But to do that, we really need to understand what blood is, right? What is this game trying to tell us about it? Is it the blood that's great, or is it something else about the blood that's great? And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that as we go through. So literally the first sentence of the game starts off with the word pale blood. And I'm not going to go into what pale blood is and stuff like that in this video, not yet anyways. But it does automatically right there. You hear the word blood. The whole game, the word is used. The mechanic you level up with is blood echoes. The old adage from Byrgenwerth is a password that says fear the old blood. It's used in things such as blood ministration and blood saints. When you kill a boss, it rains down blood. Blood is everywhere in this game. It's one of the core ideas. And it makes sense. The game's titled Bloodborne, so it would make sense that it is. But really the question is why? Why is blood so important? And you could probably ask a bunch of people this, and you would either get several different answers. But they really, to me, revolve around that blood is strength in this game. It is the idea of having the ability to heal, the ability to have power. And it's kind of something that's you'll see throughout as I speak what I'm talking about. Whereas in eyeballs, which is also another kind of idea of this game, something you don't get right off the bat though in the game, you kind of get a little bit later in, is more equal to knowledge or insight. So both, you could say, it technically could lead to power, right? Blood meaning strength, but knowledge also leads to power. So it's kind of this versus thing going on. Like, is it knowledge you want, or is it strength you want, or is it the ability to have both? Is that what really a great one is? And I think that's kind of the themes that are fighting each other in this game, and you're going to see that as I talk a little bit about Laurence and Willem and what's going on there. They definitely wanted you to understand that blood is important right off the bat, though, especially when it comes to blood echoes, and that to beat the game you must transcend a hunt, but to do that you need to find the pale blood. Again, something with the word blood in it. They just really wanted you to understand the importance of it. However, they also wanted you to understand that whatever this blood is, or whatever blood is not a free thing, that there is a price to pay for it. So actually, when I started this game, this is kind of like a little bit of a side note. When I started this game, I thought when I saw the trailers for it, I was like, this game, has werewolves in it. I think that's what most people thought. But when I started, I was like, this is very more like vampirism than it is werewolves. It doesn't seem to be so much about werewolves. A lot of the enemies you fight are werewolves, but the people here seem to be more vampiric, more about blood and things like that. So to me, like right off the bat, a lot of this game reminded me of what it is to be a vampire, and that's not very unfamiliar to this game. In fact, later on in the game, you go to a place that pretty much shows you that they're vampires in this game. You have to imbibe blood. Imbibe is used in this game a lot. You need blood to heal or gain benefits, and the older the blood is, the more powerful. These are things that you read a lot when you read about vampires and monsters that are like vampires. And it's also true to say that this might be true for other monsters as well, but vampires was really the first thing I thought of when I started playing this game. And I think in my first video or second video, I'm like, wow, this feels really vampiric. I think I say it. So it's very just interesting that that's there. What's really interesting to me is how they took this game and they were able to add all these like fabled monsters into it, right? All these gothic monsters, and then even like cosmic monsters, I guess you would say, Lovecraftian monsters. They were able to add all these into the game and actually make something coherent that made sense. And I think it makes sense only because we're able to kind of come up with our own story and figure out how it all works. And they give us little hints and tips and ideas along the way that kind of help us go, oh, okay, that kind of, oh, I see how that fits. And everybody comes up kind of with their own story, and that's what really makes this game amazing, is that I kind of have a different experience than someone else would. But it's also cool to hear everybody's experiences, and that's why I am talking right now, because I hope you guys think what I say is cool. And if not, that's cool too. I just want to get a discussion out there about exactly what's happening, and if you can agree or disagree, and that's fine. But that all stems down to the way this game was made with these monsters. Now anyways, all that came about just because of blood. That made me, right there, even though blood is directly related to the game, it all made me think of something outside of the game and things like that. So really, it's really interesting. Now, it's probably easy to me to suggest that at one point in the game, at some time, there were humans and they all had their own blood. Like, they had human blood. But there was something that changed, right? And that unknown source came from something the game keeps calling a holy medium. And this holy medium seemed to have come from the labyrinth beneath Yharnam. The labyrinth of the old gods, as it says sometimes, or the labyrinths of the slumbering great ones. They call it a lot of things. They call it a tomb as well. There's many different references to it, but it lies beneath Yharnam, and this holy medium came there. So Byrgenwerth was the first to rediscover this labyrinth, is the way I would say it, because this labyrinth obviously exists and was made by someone. So they're really the first ones, I guess you could either, well, maybe not necessarily rediscover, but they were the ones to discover it. However, their adage says, fear the old blood, shows that they respect whatever they found down there, or the blood that they found down there, and that they were maybe slightly afraid of it for some reason. I mean, the word fear is used, so that shows that. But I think more of like fear the old blood is more like respect it, instead of being straight afraid of it. They cared more about the other aspects of the labyrinth and maybe not necessarily the blood. Now, this doesn't mean that they didn't try using the blood in different ways, but it means that they just had a respect for it. I think the Carol ruins are a good example of them using blood ruins instead of the blood itself, right? You learn of this adage from a memory with Laurence in the great cathedral after the fight with Vicar. or the Vicar. I always say Vicar now. Vicar Amelia. To me, I believe a lot of people, the skull is Laurence's skull. The one that starts the cutscene is Laurence's skull. And the whole scene, you're watching the events fold from someone's eyes. And that's the way it's kind of perceived. So this whole cutscene is perceived that way. You learn of that old adage, fear the old blood, from that cutscene. So that's what I'm really trying to say right there, is that, you know, there's this cutscene. It's Laurence's skull that's on the altar. I believe actually in the guide, Miyazaki says that that's Laurence's skull in his little Q&A in the back of the guide. So all these things, well, once the guy who makes the game says that's what it is, at that point, that's just kind of what it is, right? So you get to see kind of what Laurence and Willem were, and in the game, this is really the first time you see that. So it's just very interesting that these guys in Byrgenwerth, these scholars, respected the blood, and doesn't necessarily mean they were really afraid of it. They just respected it, and they knew not to really dwell in it. And that's kind of what Willem wanted. Willem was more about eyeballs. If you really want to boil it down to, Willem was more about eyeballs. And then we're going to kind of talk about and show kind of what Laurence was really about, what he really wanted, and what kind of happened there, or at least to what I think happened there. So Alfred decided to give us some good information. As crazy as Alfred was in the entire game, he was actually very useful for some information. And one of the things he says is, well, once a group of young Byrgenwerth scholars discovered a holy medium deep within the tomb. This led to the founding of the Healing Church and the establishment of blood healing. In this sense, everything sacred in Yharnam can be traced back to Byrgenwerth. We learn Byrgenwerth is a place from long ago. It is referred to as a old place of learning, right? Doesn't necessarily mean at the time when Willem and Laurence were there that they were there when it first was built, right? They could be, you know, a couple generations down. Just Byrgenwerth itself was old, right? Like if I go to an old library to study, doesn't mean I was there at the beginning of the library. It just means I was there to study at the library. Or like, you know, if I go to a really old college, doesn't mean I was there at the beginning of it. Just that I was at that place at that time, at a place of an old place of learning. So it's kind of, we got to kind of separate that thought, right? Unless something tells us, you know, otherwise. So, but why does the Healing Church decide to go directly against Byrgenwerth's adage is what's really crazy here. Because, in fact, like I said earlier, the old adage was fear the old blood. But when you go fight the Vicar Amelia, she's chanting something, and the first line of the chant is seek the old blood. Now, this is the exact opposite thing. So somewhere down the line, Byrgenwerth, the Healing Church, they kind of separated, and they decided to do the opposite things. Yeah, Byrgenwerth fearing it, the Healing Church seeking it. So when you first enter to fight Vicar Amelia, like I said, she says seek the old blood, and then I think literally the next line, or maybe a little bit after that, it's not very far into the little chant, she says, let us partake in communion and feast upon the old blood. Communion is brought up a lot in this game. You hear it a couple times, multiple times. There's ruins named Communion that deal with having more blood vials. And really, I think it's something that needs to be understood because it does directly relate to blood. And it's the idea of, you know, absorbing or getting or taking in some kind of medium. In this case, it's probably blood, so that we have a connection with wherever that medium came from, right? So that's kind of what communion is. That's kind of what communion is in our world as well. However, the bigger thing of that little phrase, that little chant she says, is that to get it, they have to feast upon the old blood. Now, the word feast is very strong. It's a very strong word, and to me, it means that they're like engorging on this stuff. And to do that, wherever they're getting it from is either dead, has been dead, or was killed to get it. That's just my take on that word. I think they would have used something else if they really wanted to portray that it was coming out of a waterfall, or if it was like already there in like a bowl or a chalice or something. But to me, feast means that they had to do something to get it, and to me that means they either killed something, or something maybe already been dead, or they were doing something. And I think the key word here is they hunted something, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, Alfred, he states, the previous quote by Alfred was stated about the Byrgenwerth, but this one that I'm about to say was under the dialogue for the church, and it's just one line. He says multiple things, but the one line I really took away was, I have heard that the holy medium of blood healing is venerated in the main cathedral. And I had to look up the word venerated, and it's defined as showing deep respect to something that is considered great or holy. Well, if you think back to the main cathedral, there was only two things I could think of that was really being considered and being shown respect as great or holy. One you have to see through the main storyline, but the other one was kind of in the upper cathedral, kind of away, and it was like a secret area. And what I'm talking about is obviously Laurence's skull. You have to see that. It's set up upon an altar, and Vicar Amelia is kneeling before it holding a pendant. So that to me shows some respect for it, some greatness for it, so that it's holy or great to her, or to the church at least. The hidden object is not a Briatos. It's actually what a Briatos is kneeling before and bowing to. And that was a stone body of something that looked like Rom's or one of Rom's minions. Looked more like Rom's minion, because Rom was the big fat like slug looking thing that had little teeny legs. And it summoned the thing that was stone in there. Now that was something else that was also portrayed as something great or holy inside the main cathedral. Even though it was hidden, it was part of it. So those two things are there. Now when he says that he believes, or he's heard, right? He heard that the holy medium of blood healing is venerated at the main cathedral. It could be one of these two things. Well, to me, I think it's actually really not that is the holy medium. I think those are there to show you what held the holy medium before, but I don't think in itself they were the holy mediums. They were like the medium that was holding the holy medium. And we're going to talk a little bit here in a minute about what exactly the holy medium was. But let's first talk a little bit about the formless great one, Adon, right? You get two runes, which describes a little bit more to us about this great one. In fact, really, he's really the only one really mentioned in any of the runes as a great one. I don't think there's many other. I mean, the great one is mentioned in like all the runes, but he's like one of the few that are actually named, like Adon. You know, one of them is called Formless Adon, the other one's called Adon's Wraith. Like, none of the other runes really have that kind of name to it. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I don't think there's one. There are some that, you know, they say Great One in it, or the voice of the Great One, but they don't actually give a name. So I bring this up because Adon seems to be someone important to the church. There's areas named after him, right? You have the Tomb of Adon, you have Adon Chapel, you have all these places and worships that's given to him. So at one point, not necessarily at the point you're playing the game, but at least at one point, he seemed to be of importance to the church, of something of greatness. Now, the rune states, I believe both of them say this, either one. It says, human or no, the oozing blood is a medium of the highest grade and the essence of the formless great one, Adon. Now, it's very interesting and very peculiar to me that they say that the medium is of the highest grade, and also that there is a holy medium, right, that's somewhere in the main cathedral. I also find it weird that the words human or no is used too, right? It really suggests that whether, to me, it says that humans or maybe some kind of kin was carrying this medium with them, and that's what was the holy medium, not necessarily the person carrying it. So if you go back to Adon's Wraith, it says that Wraith sees a subtle mucus in the warmth of blood. So that kind of points to that there's something, not necessarily the blood itself, but there's something in the blood. Now, I've been like hyping about and talking about blood this whole time. Like, blood is mentioned all the time throughout this game, blah, blah, blah. But maybe it's not necessarily the blood that's special. It's the subtle mucus that's found inside the blood. If you look at some of the cold bloods that you use to gain blood echoes, if you actually get them all, if you have them in your inventory right now in the game, go line them all up and then go down them. What it looks like is, it really looks like, the first one looks like a drop of blood, and then as you go down, it almost looks like a flip book of the blood light coming down and then settling and then turning into something of greatness, and inside of it is something that looks, you know, different about it, and it's not necessarily blood, but there's something in the blood. And I think that's what this is really trying to portray to you, is that there's something in it that's special, not necessarily the blood itself that is. So Adon's blood was really potent. It was, remember, it was the highest grade, right? It was the finest blood you could find in the realm, and it was really potent. So to me, that means it was loaded with this mucus stuff. In fact, this blood may not have even been red; it could have been white. So that kind of maybe makes you think back to what pale blood is, and exactly that. And I think there's multiple ways to take pale blood exactly, and that's one of them, is that there are blood out there that's more not red and is a paler look to it because it's filled with this maybe mucus to it. The other things that when you think of mucus, I think of, you know, something that is in this game or shown in this game are like slugs, right? Slugs have a lot of mucus around them. Tentacles have a lot of mucus around them. So these are things that I also think of when I think of a mucus. So just something of a little bit of side note. It doesn't really have too much of importance, but it's kind of there. Now, what I find really interesting, and it kind of made me think as I was going through this, is that this blood, or this holy medium, remember, originated back when the young scholars found it in the labyrinth, right? That's what Alfred said there. There were young scholars that found it in the labyrinth. That wasn't the beginning of Byrgenwerth. Byrgenwerth, like I said, it probably existed before that. Just these young scholars found this holy medium inside the labyrinth. Now, what I do think happened, and this is probably a little bit on speculation because there's nothing that says this happened, but I believe that the scholars probably brought the blood back to Byrgenwerth, and then they probably didn't do much with it. They probably like messed around with it a little bit, experimented on it. At this time, remember, Byrgenwerth isn't, even though it's a place of knowledge, it's when we get there, we find out that they were kind of doing some crazy stuff too, that they weren't necessarily this holy power, this cool people, because Willem kind of seems like he's a good guy and he's doing things for a good reason, but he's kind of going the wrong way about it, right? I've said this before, but you know, the means, I gotta say it right, the ends don't justify the means, right? How you get to the end, even though it might be a great thing, doesn't mean if you do it in a shitty way that that's the best way to do it. So, and you see this throughout it. So there's a lot of experimentation and stuff going on at Byrgenwerth with the scholars and whatever they're doing with what looks like insects or many different things, especially with eyeballs, because that's Willem's thing, is eyeballs. He wants to figure out ways to get eyeballs in your brain so he can go to different planes of existence. That's kind of his thing. But he, you know, the adage is to fear the old blood. So I don't think that it's that when they brought this back, maybe they didn't really do anything with it. They could have messed around with it, because he did say fear the old blood, but he doesn't seem, like I said earlier, that he cares if you try to figure out maybe a different way to use it. And I think Carol runes are an example of that, right? In fact, when you get the tool that you use to implement Carol runes, it says on there that, you know, Willem would have been proud of Carol for figuring out a way to use the blood without actually, you know, using the blood, by putting it on runes instead, or finding a way to use runes. And I think that shows kind of like, you know, that he not necessarily was like against experimenting with blood. He just didn't want you, he wanted you to respect it, I think is like the best way to put it. And I said that earlier, is to respect it. But another thing to remember is that the student uniform, when you go get it at Byrgenwerth, says the Healing Church had its roots in Byrgenwerth. And when you say something had its roots there, to me that's where it originated. So to me, the Healing Church actually originated in Byrgenwerth. That's where it started. And then when the church's uniform took from the school design. So Byrgenwerth actually created the Healing Church. Now, does that mean that they created blood administration? No, the Healing Church could have been created for something else. You know, maybe the things that they were figuring out at the time or whatnot. Again, this is kind of like on the side of speculation, me kind of making stuff up. Nothing really there to say, but the fact that the Healing Church existed at Byrgenwerth is, I think, that's true. But now, why they would call it the Healing, maybe it wasn't called the Healing Church at the time, it was called something else, but for what we know it as, it's called the Healing Church, and that kind of started there. And in fact, you know, Willem could have been part of the beginnings of it. And because the church was there, it's possible that the choir also existed at this time. And the reason why I say that is because the choir really believed more into kind of what Willem's mind of thinking was, and not so much what you find out the church is doing, you know, at the time you're doing it, about what they're doing with the blood and stuff like that. The choir was a little bit more on the side of what Willem was doing, and you get that from the armor you get from the choir. Especially, I believe the headpiece says that, you know, the reason why it covers the eyes is a respect out of Willem's way of teaching and stuff like that. So if they all existed around the same time, it could be say that the choir and the healing church existed during the time of Willem, and Willem could have been part of the actual start of this place, and that the choir was really built so that Willem could understand more about what's going on with these planes of existence and things like that. And remember, the biggest thing about the choir is stated by why the choir existed, and that's through the orphanage. The key to the orphanage states that, you know, it's the birthplace of the choir. It's shadowed by the Grand Cathedral, was a place of scholarship and experimentation where young orphans became potent, unseen thinkers for the healing church. The choir that would later split the healing church was a creation of the orphanage. So there, it's, you know, it says that when the choir existed, not necessarily was the healing church already split. It would later do that, but the creation of the choir was from the orphanage. So this could show where Willem was getting, or the scholars of Byrgenwerth maybe were getting its people to experiment on, maybe a little bit. It shows that kind of who these what was kind of maybe going on underneath what was being seen, actually, because these were creating unseen thinkers for the healing church, not for Byrgenwerth, mind you. This is for the healing church. So it's very understandable that this could be maybe where things started, maybe splitting. Now, I don't think at this point the choir has found a Briatas yet, and that's basically because of what the Great Is Chalice description says, that it was something that was found later on. Basically is what it says. So the choir was creating these creating potent unseen thinkers, and they were for the healing church. It also says, you know, the Grand Cathedral existed. So to me, that kind of puts things in a time frame where Byrgenwerth existed and at least the Grand Cathedral existed. And if those two existed, then it's a possibility that Old Yarnum could have existed at this time too. Again, there's nothing that actually states that's true, but it's very possible. You know, Byrgenwerth is over here, Grand Cathedral over here. These people had to live somewhere is the way I look at it. So I'm like, well, that's probably what Old Yarnum was, right? At this time. Now, the new part of Yarnum hasn't existed yet because the bad stuff hasn't happened yet. So if we look further down, though, on what Vicar Amelia is chanting, though, so we'll go all the way back to what Vicar Amelia is chanting. Later on in her chant, it kind of goes from like, yeah, seek the blood, this is what we want, it's cool, it's making us feel good, and then it goes, our thirst for blood satiates us, soothes our fears. It says, seek the old blood, but beware the frailty of men. Their wills are weak, minds young. The foul beast will dangle nectar and lure the meek into the depths. Remain wary of the frailty of men. Their wills are weak, minds are young. I believe someone was lured by this blood. More than likely was lured by Adon, possibly, right? Remember, Adon was formless, but he did have a voice, or she, or it, I guess you could say it had a voice. And I believe this person it lured was Laurence. Laurence, at the time of the cutscene, seemed young. He could very well be frail and weak in the mind. He may not understand exactly what's going on. And, you know, he was kind of lured by this great one, lured to maybe start thinking about, you know, using this blood against the old adage. Now, he says to Willem, he's like, look, I'll remember the old adage, but he never says, you know, that he's not going to go against it. He just says, I won't forget it, right? I get it. But Laurence may think he has the ability to control it. When you say your minds are young, you know, young minds are usually like that. They're very much saying, you know, we're invincible, I'm all right, I can deal with it. That's why a lot of car wrecks are because of kids going like 90 miles an hour. You know, most of us were probably not much different. We just thought at that age we're invincible, we could do what we want, right? But we didn't have the ability to think of exactly what could happen. And a little bit that's taken from our outside world and maybe looking into it in a weird way, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. And Willem's like, and Willem may have already known Laurence may have already taken some of this blood, and he may have already been using it and seeking it. And that's why Willem kind of already knows that he's betrayed me. He's like, I know you're going to betray me, right? He's like, but he might already know that. Laurence is like, no, I'm not going to betray you, but you just don't get it. Like, you don't understand. It really sounds like if you really think about it, it's kind of like a son and a dad talking, right? Like the dad's like, don't do that. And the son's like, no, I'm going to do it. You just don't get it, Dad. You don't understand, right? And then he's like, but don't worry, I understand what you're saying, but you just don't get it. It feels like that kind of conversation, just in a very not said in that way. And he's like, don't worry, I remember the adage and all that stuff. But I think he was one of the first ones to actually take in this holy medium, or the blood of Adon. And it shows that it was because of the frailty of men, right? And then he kind of did what Willem was like, don't do it. I told you not to do it, don't do it. And it seems in the end that Willem probably was right not to do it, or at least not do it that way. But at this point, Laurence now goes to the church, and he shows that his blood can do things. It can heal. It has some fascinating powers or whatnot. And what ends up happening, now this doesn't happen like instantly. It's not like the day later this all happens. But, you know, at this point, you know, the church is like, ooh, Laurence, you know, you're cool. You got this cool blood in you. Let us use it. And then throughout, you know, people are sick, people are dying, people are hurt. This stuff starts getting passed down, that, you know, his blood is able to heal, it's able to do these things, and that kind of explains how this blood gets out, and why Laurence is seen as kind of like a saint, or a great thing, or a great person to the church, and why his skull is on the altar, and also kind of explains Oedon and why he's important to the church, because, you know, I don't think Laurence was like, I'm a badass, it's my blood that's like this. I think he, you know, he tells them, you know, this is my blood mixed with the Great One's blood, and he kind of explains what's going on. Again, remember, Adon had a voice. It's not like he was just completely silent. And this kind of begins the era of blood administration, and exactly how all that started. But like I said, it looks like Willem was right, because soon after, people want more blood. Remember the Vicar Amelia's, our thirst for blood satiates us, it soothes our fears. So people wanted more of it, and more of it, and more of it. You know, very, like I said, vampiric. And Laurence obviously can't just keep getting his blood out to people. That's not going to work. He's going to die if he does that. So he needs to do something else, and he knows where to get more of this blood. He knows may not necessarily be Adon's blood, but he knows where to get more of it, and he knows that he has to get down in the labyrinth. He also knows he needs hunters to do so, because to get the blood, they have to feast, quote unquote, feast on it. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean they were eating it, but they had to go kill things to get it. So here comes Gehrman to the rescue. This is when he enters the story. And we're not going to talk too much about him right now in this story, but he's kind of like maybe the first one to help Laurence out. We do know that Gehrman knows Laurence and Willem through his dreams that he has in the hunter's dream when you're playing the game. So we know that he knows of them. So this is kind of like, you know, where they kind of begin, or where they kind of meet, how they meet, where Gehrman started out, who he was, all that stuff is kind of really not known, right? There's nothing given too much history. In fact, I think if they ever make DLC for this game, it's going to be something about that, because they kind of did that with, you know, what's his face from Dark Souls 1 with Sif, the dog. I forgot the guy's name. And they kind of did like his kind of backdrop and a little bit about what happened to him. So I think, you know, one of these DLCs coming out hopefully is about Gehrman and who he was a little bit, and a little bit about his history. I think that would be pretty cool. But back to Gehrman coming to the rescue, and he's kind of one of the first hunters, right? When you fight him in the end game, you fight him, it says Gehrman the first hunter, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that he was the first hunter ever in the entire world, right? It doesn't mean maybe he was even the first one that Laurence used. I think that more has to do with that he was the first hunter used by the moon presence, and not necessarily the first hunter ever, right? But this is kind of where Gehrman enters the picture in the whole scheme of things. And this kind of begins the idea of what communion is in the church, right? That these hunters are going down there to get this blood for us to absorb so that we can be closer to the great ones. And it kind of brings that idea to the church, and people are like, whatever, we just need this blood because we're hungry, and it satiates us and all this crazy stuff. And this is kind of like the part where like the pungent blood stuff explanation comes in handy, where it's saying that blood is now even more intoxicating than alcohol and all this stuff, because it's super important to these people because they need it, right? It makes them alive. And it's kind of creepy in that aspect. And these things were being done at first, unseen, right? These hunters would go to these labyrinths and do these things for people, and then come out, with this blood and for the people and stuff. And it was very unseen. And most of these hunters and their followers and the people of the citizens, they don't really know, but they're inadvertent worshippers to Adon himself, right? He has these worshippers, and they're doing these hunts secretly, and it's for communion and all this stuff. So it matches really what the rune says, even though they don't know it. They're really worshiping this great one who's kind of just taking over. Now, one of the things to think about is as you're going through the game, cleric beasts, Papa Gas, Vicar Amelia, Bloodstarved Beast, they're all kind of not the same size. Cleric Beast being big, and then I believe Vicar Amelia probably being the biggest. And I think that kind of shows that as you get closer to the top, the more your blood has been tainted, or by this subtle mucus that's inside of it, and the closer you are to the top of the church, at least to the top of the healing church, the closer you are to becoming a bigger, when you transform, the bigger beast you're going to be. And that kind of explains like the cleric beast and why hunters may not be as big of a beast, but they're still beast-like. That might also have to do a little bit more about hunters, and we'll talk about that in another video. They'll probably have their separate video, because the hunters are a very interesting thing in the game, because there's all sorts of different ones, and some of them aren't even really hunters, some of them are. You're very special compared to everybody else, and things like that. So we'll delve into that a little bit more later, but for now, just that these kind of things were occurring. So they were going down there. They were seeking this blood deep in the labyrinths, and awesome, hunters exist now. They're getting this blood for the healing church, but something happens, and that something is that some reason whenever the moon hits a certain phase, people would turn into beasts. They would turn from vampires into werewolves, and this became known as the ashen blood sickness. And you read about that on the antidote when you acquire the antidotes. So now these hunters are probably tasked from hunting down in the labyrinth. They're like, well, you got to kill these beasts in the population. And this is where the idea of maybe like where the white church hunters come from, the black church hunters come from, things like that, to stop the sickness from occurring, because now they're realizing that something is wrong. Something is really wrong. How fast this occurred, I don't, there's nothing that says. Could they've lived like fine for a while, and then all of a sudden, something happens and then this happened, or is this something that just happens every once in a while? But what does happen, I believe, is one of these moon phases, something different occurs, something completely different, and then the moon changes by a lot, and that kind of starts the whole events and the tragedy of Old Yarnum. And that's kind of where I'm going to end this, is right there, the tragedy of Old Yarnum. So in the next episodes, we'll talk a little bit about that, come up with another subject to talk about, because at this point, we kind of understand what blood is, where it came from, and then ultimately what it's doing to these people. And then it's just the same effect over and over again as it goes on. Like I said, I think some of the hunts were occurring, they were simple hunts. They weren't like anything crazy like you're going through right now necessarily, but they weren't very fun either. They were still, you had to still kill people that were changing. But I think something that is kind of close to what's occurring right now happens. And there's some reasons behind why that's happening, because there's other things happening at the church that isn't necessarily just the healing church. And I think that's kind of what brings up Old Yarnum. And then we'll see what happens to Byrgenwerth and things like that, at least in the way I tell the story. So this is going to be the end of this episode. and the reason is because this is where blood and eyeballs start melding into one, at least for me, right? It's also where I get super speculative, and there's a lot of, I'm trying to find a lot of item lore and stuff that I'll add into next time, but you know, we'll kind of look at it a little bit more. Now, like I said, if you have anything you want to talk about, discuss about, you want to point something out where I'm a complete idiot, that's fine. If you want to point something out and say, hey, that makes sense, that's cool too. So definitely let's talk about it, and hopefully I can make sense of the whole story in the next coming episodes. So for right now, guys, peace out, and I will definitely hope to see y'all next time. Later.